Welcome, and lay back, get comfortable, maybe let your head sink into your pillow. Tonight, we will journey through one of humanity's most thrilling yet strangely quiet competitions, the space race, a story not just of rockets, but of ambition, fear, genius, and the unyielding human desire to explore. Our tale begins in the aftermath of a world torn by war, post-war tensions, and the dawn of the space age. In 1945, the world was emerging from the shadow of the Second World War. Cities lay in ruins, economies staggered, and millions of lives had been forever altered. But amid the devastation, something remarkable was beginning to take shape, an era that would push humanity beyond the confines of our blue planet. The United States and the Soviet Union, once uneasy allies against the Axis powers, had now entered a tense standoff. This period would later be called the Cold War, a time defined by suspicion, ideological rivalry, and the unspoken threat of nuclear annihilation. Yet, out of this conflict, a new theater of competition emerged: the sky itself. The space race was born not merely out of curiosity, but out of a desire for supremacy. Both nations understood that whoever mastered space technology first would not only gain a strategic military advantage, but also claim an unmatched symbol of national prestige. For the Soviet Union, space represented proof of the superiority of the socialist system. The USSR had suffered immensely during the war, and its leaders wanted a triumph that could unify its people and show the world the power of communism. Their strategy was clear: focus resources, centralize research, and leverage brilliant minds like Sergei Korolev, the hidden genius behind many early Soviet rockets. The United States, on the other hand, approached the challenge from both fear and ambition. Intelligence reports suggested that the Soviets had captured German rocket technology, including the V-2 ballistic missiles, and were quietly advancing their own rocketry programs. Americans were determined not to fall behind, with engineers like Werner von Braun, another former German scientist who now worked in the U.S. The country set out to turn those fears into a technological edge. By the late 1940s, both nations were experimenting with long-range rockets capable of reaching the upper atmosphere. The V-2 technology had shown that humans could push machines beyond the skies. But no one had yet imagined that these rockets could eventually leave Earth entirely. Yet the dream was alive, fueled by political urgency, scientific curiosity, and, in many ways, a deep-seated sense of competition. The first major victory in this silent race came to the Soviets. On October 4, 1957, the world's eyes turned to the skies as a tiny, beeping satellite named Sputnik 1 emerged from orbit. The Soviet Union had beaten the Americans into space for the very first time. It was a simple metallic sphere, barely 58 centimeters in diameter, yet its significance was immense. News of Sputnik sent shockwaves through the United States. Many Americans felt both awe and panic. If the Soviets could launch a satellite into space, could they also launch missiles capable of striking the U.S. mainland? This fear sparked what would later be called the Sputnik crisis, prompting a flurry of scientific, political, and educational initiatives aimed at closing the perceived gap. In response, the U.S. government created NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, in 1958. Schools began emphasizing science and mathematics more than ever before. Rocket research accelerated. The competition had officially become a defining feature of global geopolitics. Meanwhile, the Soviets were not content with a single success. Following Sputnik, they launched Sputnik 2, carrying Laika, a dog, into orbit. Laika became the first living creature to circle the Earth, a somber milestone that highlighted both the risks of space exploration and the boldness of Soviet ambition. By the end of the 1950s, it was clear the space race was no longer a theoretical rivalry. It was real, dangerous, and exhilarating. Each nation saw space as a stage on which to prove not only technological prowess, but also ideological superiority. And with each satellite launched, each rocket tested, humanity inched closer to the unimaginable dream of stepping onto another celestial body. As we slowly drift through this story, imagine the night sky of that era, The first twinkling satellites, the immense anticipation, the quiet tension. Both superpowers looked upward, knowing that whoever controlled the heavens might also control the future. As the 1960s dawned, the space race had evolved from quiet experimentation into a dramatic showdown that captured the imagination of millions. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were now racing not just to orbit satellites, but to send humans into space. And the stakes were higher than ever. For the Soviets, the early 1960s would bring their most remarkable achievement yet. On April 12, 1961, the world witnessed a moment that would be remembered forever. Yuri Gagarin, a young Soviet pilot, became the first human to journey into outer space. Imagine the tension in the control room at Baikonur Cosmodrome, the anticipation crackling in the air like static electricity. As Gagarin's Vostok 1 spacecraft lifted off, the world held its collective breath. He orbited the Earth once, witnessing the planet from a perspective no human had ever experienced. The curvature of the Earth, the thin veil of the atmosphere, the silent blackness of space, it was a view that would inspire generations to look upward in wonder. Gagarin's flight was more than a personal triumph. It was a propaganda victory for the Soviet Union. The USSR had once again demonstrated technological superiority, and the world took notice. Leaders, scientists, and ordinary citizens felt both awe and apprehension. Could the Soviets extend their lead to a moon landing? The questions hung in the air like a quiet storm. The United States, stung by this setback, responded swiftly. The Mercury program, America's first human spaceflight initiative, had been underway, but Gagarin's success ignited urgency. The goal was clear: put an American into space and catch up to the Soviets. On May 5, 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American in space. Though his flight was suborbital, he didn't circle the Earth like Gagarin had. Shepard's journey lasted just 15 minutes. Yet it marked the beginning of the United States manned space program in earnest. While the Soviets had orbited the planet, the Americans were now officially in the race. President John F. Kennedy, recognizing the symbolic importance of space exploration, made a historic declaration later that year. In a speech before Congress, he famously announced a bold objective: "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard." The challenge was immense, but it would define the next decade of American science and engineering. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union continued their relentless pace. The Vostok program gave way to the Voskhod missions, which achieved further firsts in human spaceflight. The Soviets were sending multiple cosmonauts into space at once, and even performed the first spacewalk. Each achievement deepened the sense of urgency on the American side. The early 1960s were also a period of experimentation and learning. Both nations discovered that space was not just a technological challenge, but a test of human endurance and ingenuity. Rockets could fail, capsules could overheat, and the psychological strain on astronauts and cosmonauts was immense. But with every mission, engineers refined designs, improved safety systems, and learned more about the unforgiving environment beyond Earth's atmosphere. As the competition heated up, a subtle race within the race emerged. The United States focused on precision, safety, and long-term planning, while the Soviets emphasized bold, record-setting achievements. This difference in approach would shape the trajectory of the space race, influencing how each nation allocated resources and planned missions. Yet, amid the political tension, there was a profound human element. Astronauts and cosmonauts were ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. They trained endlessly, endured isolation and extreme conditions, and faced danger every time they climbed into a rocket. In quiet moments, they looked out at the Earth and reflected on its fragility, its beauty, and the strange unity of a planet divided by invisible political lines. By the mid-1960s, it was clear that the space race was no longer a series of small experiments. It had become a massive, high-stakes contest, blending technology, politics, and human courage. Both nations now had their eyes set on the ultimate prize: landing a human on the moon. As you lay back and listen, imagine the first human voices in orbit, the quiet beeps of control panels, and the small figures floating against the infinite black. The race had grown personal, dangerous, and thrilling, all taking place in the silent, endless void above. Gemini, Voskhod, and the road to the moon. By the mid-1960s, the space race had moved beyond brief flights into a complex challenge of precision, endurance, and strategy. Both the United States and the Soviet Union had sent humans into space. But the next step, landing on the moon, would demand entirely new skills and technologies. The world watched as these superpowers pushed the boundaries of human imagination. The United States, learning from the Mercury flights, launched the Gemini program in 1965. Gemini's missions were designed to test the very capabilities astronauts would need to reach the moon. Long-duration flights, multiple crew members, orbital maneuvers, and the critical art of docking spacecraft in orbital. These objectives required careful planning and constant innovation. One of the greatest achievements of the Gemini program was perfecting orbital rendezvous and docking, a maneuver critical for the Apollo missions. Astronauts learned to approach another spacecraft in orbit with incredible precision, a task that demanded meticulous calculations and nerves of steel. Missions such as Gemini 6A and 7 demonstrated that humans could live in space for weeks at a time, and that spacecraft could meet, link up, and separate safely if feat never attempted before. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union continued its bold streak with the Voskhod program. Voskhod 1, launched in 1964, became the first spacecraft to carry multiple crew members into orbit, while Voskhod 2 introduced the first-ever spacewalk, performed by cosmonaut Alexei Leonov. Imagine stepping out of a spacecraft into the void, tethered by nothing more than a lifeline, with Earth spinning silently below. Leonov's spacewalk was fraught with danger. His suit ballooned in the vacuum, making it almost impossible to re-enter the capsule, but he succeeded, proving the audacity and courage of Soviet space exploration. These missions highlighted a difference in strategy between the two nations. The Soviets aimed for dramatic, headline-grabbing achievements, pushing the limits of human endurance in ways that seemed almost reckless. The Americans, on the other hand, emphasized careful testing, step-by-step progress, and building a system that could ultimately land humans on the moon and bring them back safely. Both approaches had value, but the contrast was striking. At the same time, the political dimension of the space race intensified. Every mission was broadcast globally, with the world watching and comparing each nation's success. Space had become a stage for demonstrating national strength, technological prowess, and even moral authority. Kennedy's challenge to land a man on the moon before the decade's end hung over the American space program like a lighthouse, guiding every decision, every launch, and every calculation. Back on the ground, scientists, engineers, and astronauts trained tirelessly. Simulations, parabolic flights, centrifuges, and underwater exercises all prepared them for the strange realities of microgravity. Every failure or near disaster offered lessons, shaping the next generation of spacecraft and missions. Yet through it all, the human spirit endured, fascinated by the unknown, driven by curiosity, and sometimes simply by the thrill of competition. By 1966 and 1967, both nations were demonstrating extraordinary achievements. The Soviets continued to perfect orbital flights, achieving long-duration missions that tested the limits of human physiology in space. Meanwhile, the United States was pushing the envelope with Gemini 8, where Neil Armstrong and David Scott performed the first successful docking of 2 spacecraft in orbit, though not without a terrifying in-space malfunction that tested their composure and skill. These missions served as the final proving grounds for lunar ambitions. Every experiment, every flight, and every maneuver was a rehearsal for the moon. And though the Cold War underpinned the competition, there was also an undeniable sense of shared human achievement. Both nations were proving that humans could leave their home planet, survive in the harshest environment imaginable, and return safely to tell the tale. As you relax, picture the vastness of space, the meticulous calculations behind each maneuver, and the quiet courage of astronauts and cosmonauts floating in the black void. The Gemini and Voskhod missions were more than technical accomplishments. They were a testament to human ingenuity, patience, and the relentless drive to explore. The stage was now set. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were preparing for the ultimate goal: landing humans on the moon. The lessons learned, the skills honed, and the technologies perfected during this period would define the next chapter of the space race. Apollo's journey, orbiting and landing on the moon by the late 1960s. The United States was fully immersed in the Apollo program, a colossal effort aimed at fulfilling President Kennedy's bold challenge: landing humans on the moon and returning them safely to Earth. The Apollo missions were more than a series of space flights. They were a carefully orchestrated symphony of engineering, courage, and ambition, designed to demonstrate that humans could leave Earth and touch another world. The journey to the moon began with Apollo 8, launched on December 21, 1968. This mission marked the first time humans had left Earth's orbit and traveled around the moon. Imagine astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders looking back at the Earth as it rose over the lunar horizon, a fragile, glowing sphere floating in the blackness of space. For the first time, humanity saw itself as a small, delicate part of the vast cosmos. Apollo 8 was not just a technological milestone, it was a symbolic one. The mission sent a message to the world, demonstrating American capability and determination. It also served as a crucial test of the spacecraft, the navigation systems, and the human ability to endure deep space travel. Every orbit, every communication, and every photographic experiment was a step closer to the moon landing. The following missions refined these skills. Apollo 9 tested the lunar module in Earth orbit, practicing docking maneuvers that would be essential on the lunar surface. Apollo 10, often called the dress rehearsal for the moon landing, flew the lunar module within mere miles of the moon's surface, performing all procedures except the final landing. These missions were practice, preparation, and reassurance that the final, historic step could be taken safely. Then came Apollo 11, the mission that would etch itself forever into the annals of history. On July 16, 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins lifted off from Kennedy Space Center aboard the Saturn V rocket, the most powerful rocket ever built. The world watched as this enormous machine carried 3 humans beyond their home planet, into the void of space, and toward the moon. After traveling for 3 days, Apollo 11 entered lunar orbit. Armstrong and Aldrin descended in the lunar module, Eagle, leaving Collins to orbit the moon in the command module. The tension was palpable. Every maneuver, every system check, every communication was critical. And then, on July 20, 1969, the Eagle touched down on the Sea of Tranquility. "The Eagle has landed," Armstrong reported, his calm voice masking the enormity of the moment. Humanity had set foot on another world for the first time. A few hours later, Armstrong descended the ladder and became the first human to step onto the moon. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," he said, words that would echo through time. Buzz Aldrin soon joined him, describing the lunar surface as a quiet, beautiful desolation. The 2 astronauts collected samples, took photographs, and performed experiments, while Collins circled above, keeping the orbit stable and maintaining communication with Earth. The moon was silent, empty, and breathtaking, a stark contrast to the tense political atmosphere that had driven humans to arrive there. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, though still pursuing its lunar ambitions, had faced setbacks. Their lunar program had successfully landed uncrewed spacecraft on the moon and returned samples to Earth, but they had not yet succeeded in sending humans. Technical challenges, political pressures, and the sheer difficulty of lunar travel slowed the Soviet effort, yet they continued to push forward, achieving important robotic milestones and laying the groundwork for future exploration. Apollo 11 was followed by additional moon missions: Apollo 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17 each, extending human presence, performing more sophisticated experiments, and exploring new lunar terrains. Astronauts drove lunar rovers, drilled into the surface, and studied the moon's composition, slowly unraveling its mysteries. The United States had achieved what had once seemed impossible, all while the Soviet Union watched, adapting and planning its next moves in the silent theater of space competition. As you relax and imagine the astronauts stepping carefully on the lunar surface, feel the quiet majesty of that barren world. The Earth hangs in the distance, small and fragile, while humans walk upon another celestial body. It was a moment of triumph, curiosity, and wonder-proof that determination, ingenuity, and courage can push us beyond the limits we once thought were absolute. The moon landing was not the end of the space race, but it was its most visible, enduring achievement. It showed the world that humanity could leave its cradle and step into the unknown, bridging the gap between dream and reality. The Soviet response Soyuz, and long-duration missions. After the moon landing, the space race entered a new phase. The United States had achieved a historic triumph, but the Soviet Union was far from finished. While they had not yet sent humans to the moon, they began to shift their focus toward long-duration spaceflight, space stations, and sustained human presence in orbit. This was a different kind of competition, one emphasizing endurance, engineering, and the quiet, patient accumulation of knowledge. The Soviet Soyuz program began in the mid-1960s and would become one of the most enduring spacecraft designs in history. Soyuz missions were designed for flexibility and reliability, capable of carrying crews to orbit, docking with other spacecraft, and returning safely to Earth. Early missions faced numerous challenges, including technical malfunctions and the harsh realities of space. Cosmonauts, like Vladimir Komarov, who tragically perished during a Soyuz test flight in 1967, reminded the world that space exploration was dangerous, requiring courage, precision, and resilience. Despite setbacks, the Soviets achieved remarkable successes. They focused on long-duration missions, pushing the limits of human endurance in space. Cosmonauts, such as Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space, and later Georgy Borovwa and Alexei Gubarev, demonstrated that humans could live and work in microgravity for weeks at a time. These missions were not about dramatic headlines, like moon landings. They were about understanding the human body, the life support systems, and the logistics of living in orbit. In parallel, the Soviets pioneered the development of space stations. The Soyuz program, starting in 1971, marked humanity's first attempts to establish a permanent presence in space. These orbiting laboratories allowed cosmonauts to conduct experiments over months, testing the effects of microgravity on plants, animals, and humans. The space stations were simple compared to modern designs, yet they represented a critical step forward. Living in space for extended periods required careful planning, resource management, and constant adaptation to unexpected challenges. Meanwhile, the United States also began exploring long-duration missions, though their focus initially remained on the Apollo lunar program. However, NASA soon recognized the importance of sustained human presence in orbit, setting the stage for projects like Skylab, America's first space station, launched in 1973. Astronauts lived aboard Skylab for months, conducting experiments and demonstrating that humans could work and thrive in space over long periods. By the mid-1970s, the space race began to evolve from direct competition into a subtle blend of rivalry and preparation for future cooperation. Both nations had learned valuable lessons. Rockets and spacecraft had become more reliable. Humans had proven they could survive in space, and the foundations of orbital infrastructure had been laid. The moon was no longer just a distant goal. It had been visited, mapped, and studied. Now, the focus shifted to sustaining life in space, developing technologies for future exploration, and expanding human knowledge. During this period, the Soviet Union continued to achieve quiet but impressive milestones. They perfected rendezvous and docking techniques, refined the Soyuz spacecraft, and demonstrated the feasibility of long-term habitation in orbit. These accomplishments would prove critical for future collaborative missions, including the eventual Apollo-Soyuz test project in 1975, which symbolically brought together the two rival superpowers in orbit for the first time. The space race was no longer just about who could get there first. It had become a test of endurance, strategy, and the ability to adapt. It was about pushing humans to thrive in an environment that is utterly hostile to life, while also navigating the geopolitical currents of a divided world. As you relax and imagine cosmonauts floating inside Soyuz, conducting experiments, or gazing at Earth from orbit, notice the quiet beauty of these missions. They lacked the drama of the moon landing, yet they were just as remarkable. Month after month, day after day, humans lived in space, proving that life could extend beyond Earth. These achievements, though less celebrated, laid the groundwork for the future of human spaceflight and for eventual cooperation between nations. Apollo-Soyuz and the dawn of cooperation. By the early 1970s, the intense rivalry of the space race began to show signs of transformation. Both the United States and the Soviet Union had achieved incredible milestones. Humans had walked on the moon. Orbiting spacecraft had tested human endurance, and orbital docking and rendezvous had been mastered. Yet, amid this competition, a new vision emerged: cooperation in space. This vision became reality with the Apollo-Soyuz test project in 1975. It was the first time that American astronauts and Soviet cosmonauts docked their spacecraft in orbit and conducted joint operations. The project was as much political as it was scientific. The world was experiencing a period of a relaxation of Cold War tensions, and the joint space mission became a symbol of what two superpowers could achieve when they worked together. On July 15, 1975, the American Apollo Command Module carrying astronauts Thomas Stafford, Vance Brand, and Donald Slayton launched into orbit. At the same time, the Soviet Soyuz 19 lifted off, carrying cosmonauts Alexei Leonov and Valery Kubasov. Hours later, the two spacecraft met in orbit, docking with precision. The crews shook hands in the docking module, a small, simple gesture, yet one loaded with meaning. For the astronauts and cosmonauts aboard, this mission was both routine and extraordinary. They conducted experiments, exchanged gifts, shared meals, and communicated across language and cultural barriers. Every moment demonstrated that, despite political tensions, human beings could work together in the most extreme environment imaginable. The Apollo-Soyuz mission also marked a technological milestone. Engineers from both nations collaborated to develop a universal docking system, a standard that would influence space missions for decades. It was a rare example in the Cold War era where competition gave way to collaboration, laying the foundation for future international projects, including the International Space Station. While cooperation was blossoming in orbit, both nations continued to push technological boundaries individually. The Soviet Union pressed forward with its Soyuz space stations, refining life support systems, orbital maneuvers, and long-duration human habitation. American efforts, meanwhile, culminated in Skylab, America's first space station, which hosted astronauts for weeks at a time, performing scientific experiments and studying the effects of microgravity on the human body. This era revealed an important truth about the space race. It was not just about landing on the moon or being first. It was also about understanding how humans could survive and work in space over long periods. Both nations had realized that sustainable space exploration required collaboration, learning, and sharing of knowledge, even if reluctantly at first. The Apollo-Soyuz project also offered a subtle shift in perception. The world watched a former rivals shake hands in orbit, reminding everyone that space was a frontier beyond national boundaries, where the challenges were so vast that cooperation was often the wisest course. The sight of astronauts and cosmonauts floating together in zero gravity inspired hope and imagination, even in the midst of ongoing political tensions on Earth. By the late 1970s, the space race had evolved. It was no longer a pure contest of who could achieve the most firsts. The focus had shifted toward mastering the environment of space, creating reliable technologies, and understanding the human capacity to endure in orbit. The competition had matured into a blend of rivalry and partnership, precursor to the collaborative space exploration that defines the modern era. As you relax, picture the quiet scene of two spacecraft docked in orbit. Astronauts and cosmonauts working side by side, Earth glowing softly below them. The silence of space is punctuated only by gentle mechanical hums, communication beeps, and the calm presence of humans united by curiosity and courage. This moment marked a turning point, the end of the purely competitive phase of the space race and the beginning of shared human endeavor. The shuttle era and expanding human presence in orbit by the late 1970s and early 1980s. Space exploration had shifted from short bursts of activity to sustained, methodical presence in orbit. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were investing in new technologies designed to make spaceflight more routine, safer, and increasingly ambitious. This was the beginning of the space shuttle era, a period that redefined how humans would work and live in space. The United States pioneered this shift with the development of the Space Shuttle program. Unlike traditional rockets, which were used only once, the shuttle was partially reusable. Combining the flexibility of an aircraft with the power of a rocket, it could carry astronauts, satellites, and supplies into orbit and return safely to Earth, landing on a runway like a conventional plane. This innovation promised to make spaceflight more frequent and practical, opening new possibilities for science, industry, and international cooperation. The first shuttle, Columbia, launched on April 12, 1981, a date chosen to honor Yuri Gagarin's historic flight to decades. Earlier, the cruise mission demonstrated that humans could launch, operate in orbit, and return aboard a reusable vehicle. Over the next decades, the shuttle fleet Challenger, Discovery, Atlantis, and Endeavour would ferry astronauts, deploy satellites, and assemble space laboratories, including the modular pieces that would eventually become the International Space Station. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union advanced its Soyuz spacecraft and Soyuz space stations, eventually transitioning to the Mir space station in 1986. Mir became the first long-term, continuously inhabited orbital station, serving as a laboratory, workshop, and home for cosmonauts for many years. Here, the Soviets perfected life support, orbital maintenance, and long-duration human habitation, building expertise that would influence international missions for decades. During this period, space became a platform for both scientific discovery and strategic planning. Astronauts and cosmonauts conducted experiments in biology, physics, materials science, and Earth observation. They studied the effects of microgravity on bones, muscles, and the human circulatory system. Knowledge critical for future missions beyond Earth orbit. Each orbit, each experiment, and each docking maneuver brought humanity closer to the possibility of living and working beyond our planet permanently. The shuttle era also marked the rise of international cooperation. While rivalry still existed, the groundwork laid by projects like Apollo-Soyuz created pathways for joint missions. American astronauts visited Soviet space stations, and later, Soviet cosmonauts flew aboard American shuttles. These exchanges built trust, shared expertise, and prepared the world for collaborative projects like the International Space Station, which would orbit Earth with crews from multiple nations working side by side. Technologically, the shuttle and space stations required ingenuity. Engineers solved complex problems involving orbital mechanics, thermal control, and life support systems. Astronauts learned to navigate spacecraft, conduct repairs, and even perform spacewalks in ways never attempted before. Every mission was a lesson in patience, skill, and the delicate balance of human life in the vacuum of space. The shuttle era also brought an important cultural shift. Space was no longer a distant spectacle or purely a matter of national pride. It became a working environment, a laboratory, and a classroom. People began to see astronauts and cosmonauts as explorers, scientists, and engineers contributing to knowledge that would benefit all of humanity. As you relax, picture a shuttle gliding silently above Earth. Its astronauts floating gently within, observing our planet with awe. Below, cities twinkle, oceans shimmer, and the horizon curves gracefully into the infinite black. Imagine the quiet hum of instruments, the occasional voice through the radio, and the steady rhythm of life in orbit, a rhythm that has continued for decades, connecting humans to the cosmos in ways once thought impossible. Post-Cold War collaboration, Mir, and the foundations of the ISS. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the space race had transformed once again. The fierce competition of the Cold War era was fading, replaced by opportunities for collaboration. Political changes on Earth, particularly the end of the Cold War and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, allowed the United States and Russia to pursue space exploration as a joint human endeavor rather than purely a contest of national pride. The Soviet Mir space station, launched in 1986, had already demonstrated the potential of long-duration human space. Cosmonauts lived and worked aboard Mir for months, sometimes years, perfecting life support systems, conducting scientific experiments, and maintaining the orbital station. Mir's modular design allowed additional sections to be added over time, making it the largest human-made structure in orbit and a true laboratory for sustained human activity in space. In the 1990s, the United States and Russia began a series of cooperative missions known as Shuttle Mir programs. American space shuttles visited Mir, docking with the station and delivering crews, supplies, and equipment. These missions were remarkable for both technical and human reasons. Astronauts and cosmonauts trained together, learned each other's procedures, and lived in a shared orbital environment, sometimes in cramped quarters, for extended periods. These experiences laid the groundwork for the International Space Station and created a culture of trust and collaboration in orbit. The Shuttle Mir program also provided critical scientific insights. Extended missions allowed researchers to study the long-term effects of microgravity on the human body, including bone density, muscle atrophy, and cardiovascular changes. Experiments conducted aboard Mir contributed to medical research, materials science, and even Earth observation, showing that space was not just a frontier for exploration, but also a platform for understanding our home planet and ourselves. The cooperation was more than symbolic. Engineers from both nations had to integrate different spacecraft systems, navigation protocols, and communication technologies. Crews had to work together in real time to solve unexpected problems, such as orbital debris, system malfunctions, and life support issues. Each challenge reinforced the reality that spaceflight requires teamwork, adaptability, and calm under pressure. During this period, space began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a shared human endeavor. The images of astronauts and cosmonauts working side by side, floating above Earth, emphasized a profound truth. Our planet is small, fragile, and unified by the cosmos itself. National boundaries seemed distant and insignificant when seen from orbit, as Earth glowed in blues and greens beneath the silent expanse of space. The lessons learned during the Shuttle Mir program directly influenced the International Space Station, ISS, which would become the largest cooperative project in human history. The ISS combined expertise, technology, and resources from multiple nations, including the United States, Russia, Europe, Japan, and Canada. This remarkable achievement reflected decades of knowledge gained from the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Soyuz, Skylab, Mir, and Shuttle missions, a culmination of everything learned during the space race and beyond. As you relax, picture astronauts floating gently inside Mir, working on experiments, sharing a quiet meal, or gazing at Earth's horizon. Imagine the soft whir of machinery, the muted voices over radios, and the steady rhythm of life in orbit. These missions remind us that even in the vast emptiness of space, humans can collaborate, innovate, and create something enduring. The post-Cold War era transformed the legacy of the space race. What began as rivalry evolved into partnership, laying the foundation for decades of international exploration. The lessons learned, the technologies developed, and the spirit of cooperation continue to inspire humanity as we look toward Mars, asteroids, and beyond. Modern exploration, robots, private spaceflights, and the Moon to Mars vision as the 21st century arrived. The legacy of the space race continued to shape humanity's approach to exploration, while the intense rivalry of the Cold War had faded. The ambitions of spacefaring nations and private companies grew ever more daring. The spirit of competition evolved into a combination of scientific curiosity, international collaboration, and entrepreneurial innovation. One of the most significant changes was the rise of robotic exploration. Mars, rovers, lunar orbiters, and deep space probes extended humanity's reach far beyond Earth orbit. The United States, Europe, and later China and India launched missions to study planets, asteroids, and comets, gathering data that would have been unimaginable during the original space race. Robots like Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance roamed the Martian surface, transmitting images, analyzing soil, and even searching for signs of past life, all while humans watched from millions of miles away. At the same time, a new actor entered the stage. Private space companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Virgin Galactic began developing reusable rockets, commercial spacecraft, and ambitious plans for orbital stations and lunar missions. This commercialization of space represented a major shift. No longer was space travel solely the domain of national governments. Innovation, entrepreneurship, and competition were now opening the cosmos to new possibilities. The United States continued its moon ambitions under programs like Artemis, aiming to return astronauts to the lunar surface, including the first woman and the first person of color. The Artemis program emphasizes sustainability, intending to establish a long-term human presence on the moon, complete with habitats, scientific stations, and resources for future Mars missions. This vision mirrors the goals of the original space race. Inspire humanity, push technological boundaries, and demonstrate what we are capable of when we dare to reach further. Meanwhile, international collaboration has become a defining feature of modern space exploration. The International Space Station ISS continues to host astronauts from around the world, including nations that were not part of the original space race. Scientific experiments span biology, medicine, materials, science, and Earth observation. Researchers study how life adapts to microgravity, how climate change affects our planet, and how humans can survive for months or even years in orbit, crucial preparation for eventual missions to Mars and beyond. China, too, has emerged as a major space power, launching crewed Shenzhou missions, establishing the Tiangong space station, and successfully landing rovers on the Moon and Mars. The global landscape of space exploration now reflects a blend of competition, cooperation, and shared human ambition, a far cry from the strictly binary rivalry of the 1960s. Yet, the spirit of the original space race still resonates. The early achievements of the United States and the Soviet Union Sputnik, Gagarin, Apollo, Soyuz set the foundation for modern exploration. The risks they took, the technology they developed, and the lessons they learned continue to inform every mission today. From robotic explorers on distant worlds to astronauts training for lunar and Martian missions, humanity builds on the daring legacy of those who first reached beyond Earth's atmosphere. As you relax, imagine a modern spacecraft gliding silently through orbit, or a rover slowly traversing a Martian plain. Picture the hum of instruments, the steady routines of astronauts, and the quiet thrill of discovery. The cosmos is vast, yet every mission, robotic or human, national or private, connects us to the same sense of wonder that drove the space race decades ago. The journey that began with competition between two superpowers has evolved into a shared human pursuit. The sky is no longer a limit, but a gateway, and the dreams of reaching the Moon, Mars, and beyond are closer than ever before. Legacy of the space race. Inspiration, innovation, and humanity's future, the space race, which began in the late 1950s as a tense rivalry between two superpowers, ultimately became one of the most extraordinary chapters in human history. What started as a contest of rockets, satellites, and astronauts grew into a story of courage, ingenuity, and vision, a testament to what humanity can achieve when inspired by curiosity and challenge. The technological achievements alone are staggering. The launch of Sputnik demonstrated that humanity could place objects into orbit, while Yuri Gagarin's flight proved that humans could survive and function in space. The United States Apollo missions, culminating in the moon landing, showed that humans could leave their home planet, explore another world, and return safely. These accomplishments required new materials, computer systems, life support technologies, and navigation methods, all of which would influence everything from aviation to medicine to telecommunications. Yet the impact of the space race extends far beyond machines and missions. It shaped our understanding of Earth and our place in the universe. Seeing Earth from orbit, a fragile blue marble suspended in darkness, shifted perspectives, inspiring environmental awareness and a deeper appreciation for the planet that sustains us. It also proved that national boundaries, so crucial on the surface of Earth, are inconsequential when viewed from the quiet vastness of space. The human element, the bravery, resilience, and determination of astronauts and cosmonauts remains central to the story. These pioneers faced immense danger, uncertainty, and isolation. They trained endlessly, endured the harshest conditions imaginable, and stepped into the unknown, whether floating in the Voskhod capsule, orbiting in Apollo 8, or walking on the moon. They showed what is possible when preparation meets courage. The space race also laid the foundation for international cooperation. From Apollo-Soyuz to the Shuttle Mir missions, and ultimately to the International Space Station, the rivalry of the past evolved into partnerships that unite nations in exploration. Today, scientists, engineers, and astronauts from around the globe work together in orbit, continuing the work begun during those first daring missions. Modern space exploration owes everything to the lessons learned during the space race. Robotic explorers travel to Mars, asteroids, and the outer planets. Private companies are developing reusable spacecraft and planning missions to the moon and beyond. Humanity's dreams of settlement on other worlds, once confined to science fiction, are now tangible goals. And all of this builds upon the daring, ambition, ingenuity, and courage demonstrated by those early pioneers. The space race reminds us that human imagination is limitless. It teaches that progress often comes through challenge and competition, yet can also flourish through collaboration and shared vision. From the first satellite in orbit to the complex laboratories circling Earth today, the story of the space race is a story of humanity striving to reach beyond itself. As you lie back and imagine the silent arcs of spacecraft above our world, the astronauts floating in weightless serenity, and the gentle glow of Earth below, feel the awe and quiet wonder of this incredible journey. The space race was not just about rockets or politics, it was about dreams, courage, and the eternal human desire to explore the unknown. And though the era of competition has passed, the legacy of the space race lives on in every mission, every astronaut, and every human who looks up at the stars and wonders what is beyond. The sky is no longer a limit, it is the invitation to explore, to learn, and to imagine, a call that continues to inspire humanity today and for generations to come.